In this video, we're going to be looking at Southampton versus Manchester United. Both teams sought to counter-attack, but whilst we'll touch on that, we're going to look at Southampton's focus on the left-hand side of Manchester United's defence and Manchester United's 3-2-5 build-up. Okay, so starting with Southampton, they sought to counter-attack, looking to exploit the spaces behind the fullback, whether that was because Malacia tucked in to become the left-sided centre midfielder on occasion, or because Dalot was essentially playing as a second right midfielder. It meant that there were spaces for Southampton to find Che Adams. Of course, there was a preference for the right-hand side where there is general assumption that Martinez can be got at. Assuming that Southampton's counter-attack was repelled, Southampton moved either to a 2-1 with Lavia screening the back two, or to a 3-2 which was used later on in the second half when Manchester United had Cristiano Ronaldo at the top of the pitch. With his shape, Lavia becomes a third centre-back, whilst Armstrong and Ward-Prowse act as the other centre midfielders. Lavia does sometimes push up from that third centre-back role back into centre midfield, but with that three centre-back positioning, they can also have those centre-backs as wide centre-backs push up very high on either side, again, potentially forcing Manchester United deeper, especially given that they're playing with Ronaldo up top. Ward-Prowse typically floated in that 2-1 midfield build-up. He typically floated on the right-hand side. He was accompanied on that side by Walker-Peters, who really was playing as the right one midfielder, with Elyounoussi and Aribo kind of occupying more central positions. Elyounoussi wanted to tuck into the half space as well as drop off to try and drag Malacia away from Martinez and create a 1v1 for Che Adams versus Martinez. Given that Varane was constantly covering Martinez, this meant that Manchester United's defence could become very narrow and potentially disorganised towards that left-hand side. Of course, Varane covering across allows Martinez to be more aggressive, trying to step in front of Southampton players, but also it bolstered the defence aerially. Speaking of, when Southampton were able to create that space on the right-hand side with that overload, they tried to whip balls in, especially having Ward-Prowse there with his excellent delivery towards that front post. Again, trying to target Martinez, but with McTominay also dropping in deep to repel these crosses, Southampton didn't get much luck from them. On loss of possession, Southampton's centre-backs and centre midfielders positioned to counter-press, similar to Manchester United's centre-backs and centre midfielders. And of course, we've got to mention Southampton's long throws. And with that, let's have a look at some examples. Starting with an example in the 38th minute. I wanted to use this scenario because of this here. We've got Martinez pushing out of the back line, being more aggressive. So whilst Southampton are looking to try and pressure him, force him into a mistake, try and dominate him aerially, he's trying to play on the front foot too. And then you see how Varane as well is narrowing the pitch. I think it's also good to mention the contrasting styles of the wide midfielders here. We've got Elyounoussi being a lot more relaxed. If Southampton were to get the ball, he would want to drop off a little bit, try and pull Malacia away from his centre-back partner to try and create a bit of distance between the two of them. Whereas Armstrong on the left-hand side is a lot more dynamic. He's making a run from out to in. He wants to try and distract Varane and take advantage of whatever Che Adams can create from him versus Martinez. Manchester United are able to clear the ball / pass the ball long to Marcus Rashford, but Rashford really isn't a focal point. He was constantly dominated by the Southampton centre-backs, and so the ball gets launched up to him and then the ball comes straight back to United. So while Salisu had just won the ball came to Eriksen, who, as this is in the first half, he looked to play that early through ball. This was a key tactic for Manchester United in the first half, looked to try and sucker punch Southampton early, abusing Eriksen's passing range. Unfortunately for Manchester United, the Southampton goalkeeper, as he tried to do whenever needed, swept against Eriksen's long ball, and we have the ball immediately back at Manchester United's half. And here we have Southampton setting up in that 2-2 shape. So currently it's a 4-2 with your two centre midfielders still relatively deep, with both of your fullbacks deep as well. But the fullbacks are going to look to push out into these wide spaces, and to create that space for them, the wide midfielders of Southampton have come very narrow. Unlike Dalot, Malacia was tasked with following Elyounoussi, which creates a little bit of a problem behind him for Martinez, because this now becomes space for the likes of Che Adams to try and attack. It also puts the onus on the wide midfielder, or in this case Bruno Fernandes, to track the run of the fullback. And so Elyounoussi here, who received the ball after Bruno Fernandes and Malacia were drawn out into a wide space by Walker-Peters' run. We now have this really nice reverse pass by Elyounoussi into the space behind Martinez, taking advantage of the space that Southampton have just created between the left back and left centre back. Unfortunately, due to the angle Che Adams run and when he finally gets control of the ball, he isn't able to take a good shot. Okay, so on to Manchester United's 3-2-5 build-up. Of course, similar to Southampton, there was a preference for counter-attacking given the strengths of the forward line. They typically avoided short goal kicks and instead focused on contesting second balls because Rashford didn't really have much luck being the focal point. When Manchester United built up from deep in a 2-3 or a 4-1 shape, Southampton set up in a 4-1-3-2 with their wide midfielders staying very narrow, trying to prevent any balls through the lines and try and force Manchester United out into a wide space. Of course, Manchester United could get around this by taking longer goal kicks or having De Gea play the ball before Southampton set up, or with movement by Malacia, for example, into a CDM position, allowing Eriksen to drop deep and use his long passing range from a deeper position where the Southampton press can't really get to. And with Eriksen in that deeper position, that also leaves more space on the right hand side for Manchester United, and they typically sought to exploit this with the higher position of Dalot, who was often the outball. So in the second half, especially the first 10 to 20 minutes, Manchester United seemed to focus more on the right hand side, especially given that Sancho was often doubled up against, with Elanga making driving runs from out to in, combining with the other Manchester United forwards who narrowed towards his side whilst Dalot overlapped, and this created considerable problems for Southampton, especially the inexperienced Djenepo, who's playing at left back, which isn't his natural position. And finally, Manchester United made a few substitutions late on, such as bringing Casemiro and Ronaldo on, and it looked like they were just trying to shore things up, given that you had now two proper defensive midfielders and you'd pushed Bruno Fernandes into a right midfield position. And with that, let's have a look at an example. Manchester United in the second half, building up with a 2-3 typically, with Dalot normally the more aggressively positioned fullback against what is meant to be a 4-2-3-1 shape here by Southampton. So we've got our 1, our 3, 2, and then our back line. Unlike in the first half where Manchester United wanted to use Jadon Sancho's dribbling ability, despite Southampton often sending two players to face him up, and Sancho having little support from Malacia, who would be taking up this kind of centre defensive position, inverting a little bit. Manchester United sought to expose Djenepo with Elanga's more direct runs. Manchester United have gone around the rather narrow press of Southampton, and now we have Elanga driving from the wide position inside, combining with the forwards as he goes along. Okay, so Southampton's defenders have been relatively flexible here. We've got Salisu, who's pushed out a bit wider to try and cover for Djenepo, who'd try to track, put pressure on Elanga, so he ends up trying to cover both Djenepo whilst maintaining a relatively small space between himself and his centre-back partner, and defend against Rashford. All the while, Elanga has driven from outside to in, combined with Rashford, and now is looking to combine with Bruno Fernandes and exploit the space created by the Southampton defenders tracking. And so we see that with him eventually having too many touches in the Southampton box, allowing the Southampton defenders to recover. Here we have Manchester United attempting to play it out of the back instead of just having De Gea launch it. Both the left back and the left CDM are looking to push higher, while Southampton set up in a 4-2-1-3 or a 4-1-3-2. So as Varane dallies on the ball, Aribo is able to cover the pass into McTominay and put pressure on the centre-back, whilst Che Adams also ends up dropping a little bit to cover for Aribo if he's bypassed, and El Yunusi, your five-sided wide midfielder, stays relatively narrow. And that's really important in the Southampton press. They're really trying to just box off this central space, prevent any passes through the lines by Manchester United, try and force Manchester United out into these wide spaces. Eventually the ball gets out here to Dalot, and he tries to keep up the short passing by passing it into McTominay, but he's covered by Aribo, who intercepts. And from there, Southampton are in a great position to counter-attack, given that they have numerical superiority in Manchester United's defensive third. Unfortunately for Southampton here, Che Adams isn't given a great number of options because both Aribo and Armstrong run inside, allowing Manchester United to clear. And with that, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider sharing it on social media, and maybe subscribing. With that, we're out.